mark that you are a good Adventist, that you recognize that Saturday is the Sabbath. Everyone is saved. But are they really saved? Because, there's these degrees within heaven, and that bottom degree doesn't sound all that fun. Conservative Christians tend to kind of hold to their faith as if it's a kind of brick wall. Today I'm going to be reacting to a video between a conservative Christian and an Adventist, a Seventh-Day Adventist. Apart from the fact that one of these guys is a conservative Christian or a so-called Bible-believing Christian, and the other one's a Seventh-Day Adventist, I'm going into this video blind. I've never watched either of any of their content. I've not watched this video. So yeah, let's begin and see how it goes.
Any outsider to this channel should be able to guess that, yes, I am a Christian. But those who've been following on for a little bit longer know that specifically, I am a Seventh-Day Adventist Christian. And while I am a proud, lifelong Adventist, it has never been my intention to convert you to becoming Adventist. In fact, I think out of the nearly 500 uploads to this channel, I can only ever think of explicitly mentioning Adventism in literally one video. Though it should be mentioned that I do show up playing the role as an explicitly Seventh-day Adventist believer in other collaborations and interviews that can be found on the internet. This decision, the one to not be the champion or defender of Adventism, or minimally to even take on the mantle of that Adventist vlogger, has been met with its fair amount of criticism within my denomination. But this is a decision that I'm still resolute on, because to me, denominationalism really just misses the point. My goal and my mission as a follower of Jesus has been and always will be simply this: to point people to him.
Yeah. I mean, the danger there, of course, is there's a possibility that you are not being honest with your audience. That by just presenting yourself as a Christian and not as a Seventh-day Adventist, you are, playing yourself off as something that you're not. Or perhaps what the greater concern would be that you're not fully expressing what you believe about any given subject because you don't want to be misconstrued or properly construed as a Seventh-day Adventist, as opposed to just a generic Christian, whatever that means.
One of my favorite Christian authors of all time, C.S. Lewis, took a similar approach. In his introduction to the book Mere Christianity, he describes Christianity as a great hall, of which connected to are several doors leading to several rooms. Each room represents a different type of denomination or congregation with a vast host of differing beliefs. In one room, you might have Pentecostals, or Baptists, or Lutherans, or Catholics. In other rooms, there's Adventists and Evangelicals and Eastern Orthodox and Methodists.
And, of course, the problem with that would be that some denominations would not recognize the legitimacy of other denominations. So this is this idea of there being many rooms, this kind of C.S. Lewis idea, affirms this idea that there's just a complete equality of all denominations. And, depending on what I think about that, that's definitely not what some of those denominations think. Take an obvious example, the LDS Church. They often try and pass themselves off as Christians, and whether they are or not, there's a lot of people that would not affirm that for them, especially so-called Bible-believing Christians or evangelicals would want to say that because of the beliefs of the LDS Church, they do not constitute being Christians.
However, what connects them, in my opinion, is more important than what separates them. C.S. Lewis, who self-described as an Anglican, did not find his purpose in arguing about which room was better, but instead in bringing people into the Great Hall. In other words, introducing people to Jesus and not growing members of a specific religion was always the goal. So this has been the spirit in which I have made videos on the internet. It's not about me, it's not about my denomination, but instead it's about pointing people to Christ. So keep all of that context in mind when a few weeks ago I came across a series of videos by...
That's kind of funny. That's kind of like, keep in mind the context that this conversation doesn't matter before we go into this conversation.
By Allen Parr. Allen Parr is a Christian YouTuber with over 500,000 subscribers with viral videos massing sometimes upwards of 1 million views. Recently, Allen released a series on Seventh-Day Adventism with videos titled Are Seventh-Day Adventists a Cult? I was wrong about Seventh-Day Adventism. Seventh-Day Adventism is wrong about the Sabbath, and what does if you love me, keep my commandments really mean? When I first saw the series, I debated what to do. Should I stay silent? Should I make a response video? Should I tear down all of the arguments that he made? Or should I expose Allen Parr, to use really like YouTube-esque type of language? Or should I simply give him a call? Seeing as Allen Parr and I have been friends for several years, I decided on the latter. This is my conversation with Allen Parr about Seventh-Day Adventism. So, I want to get into the videos that you had created over the last couple of months, but before then, I actually kind of want to rewind to even several years ago when you and I and John kind of first connected over the internet. I want to kind of get a snapshot of what life looked like then and what your whole heart behind starting the channel and intention was. What was the dream? Why did you get started on social media ministry? How did it all begin for you?
Yeah, so for me, essentially, it's funny. It kind of was birthed out of a place where I was, if I'm honest, like I was somewhat discontent with the situation I was in at the time in terms of my church, and I just felt like I wasn't really getting opportunities to speak and to use the gift that I believe that God had given me. And so I was like, okay, preaching twice a year and basically being under the control of someone else who's telling me when I can and cannot use my gift was very, very frustrating, knowing that God had really gifted me and called me to teach and preach his word. So I started looking at, okay, how can I really get the word of God out to as many people as possible without having to answer to anyone in terms of like, you can do it now and you can't do it then. So I started looking at YouTube and I was like, okay, wow, if people are getting all these views putting out filthiness and stuff that's like not even Christian like, then how much more can Christians use this platform to spread the message of truth throughout the world? So I started on YouTube, didn't know much about anything, didn't know much about cameras, lights, editing. I was just like totally green. And at first I wasn't really concerned about views, subscribers, or any of those types of things. I was just excited to have a platform that I could finally get my voice out once or twice a week. So that's kind of how it started.
That's pretty cool. I know that for me, when I first started, I started kind of around 2016, early 2016. And I remember going to YouTube, like Googling Christian YouTubers, there was nobody. I mean, aside from like John, which is a mutual friend of ours, like there was almost literally nobody. I remember doing a video. Yeah, and Jeff Betsky, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's it.
I remember like making a video, top 10 Christian YouTubers, that you should subscribe to, kind of a thing. And I had to include Dave Ramsey as a quote unquote Christian YouTuber.
Yeah, so this is really not a world I'm familiar with at all. Christian content on YouTube is not a space I have engaged with at all, basically. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to kind of hear where they're coming from.
Because literally, I didn't think I had 10 people that I could actually, like, put on a list. And that was how, like, sparse the space was when it comes to faith-based content. What was it like for you? Did you see people in the space? Was there someone that you looked to was like, oh, if they're doing that, I could probably do something similar?
Yeah, so that was the interesting thing. It was that there wasn't a ton of people, like you said, because I came on 2015. My first video was August 17th, 2015. And so just a little bit before you came on. And at the time, it was even less, right? So I saw a couple people, like I didn't know too much about John, but I knew about Jefferson. But he seemed like he's doing a lot more spoken word stuff, as much more than just like straight Bible teaching. So for me, I saw my niche as, okay, I'm not doing spoken word. I'm not trying to do all these things. I just want to teach the Word of God and answer questions that people have about the faith, and teach verse by verse teaching as much as I could. And that's really what got me started. And I didn't see a lot of people that were doing that at the time.
Yeah, I remember seeing that. I remember making the connections that everyone who seemed to have had a viral video or growing an audience in the faith space, all were spoken word artists, and like they're all very good at that. And I just remember thinking, like, my goodness, does anyone even want to study the Bible on the internet, or is it only kind of like entertainment style content? And so it felt a little discouraging at the beginning for me, if I'm honest.
Yeah, so it's one of those things that was, on one hand, it was like, okay, where are the other people that are doing this? On the other hand, it's like, okay, that means there's an opportunity for people like you and I to do something different and reach a niche of people that there's not a whole lot of content out there for them.
Yeah. A couple of years into it, we actually get connected, and I've been trying to think about how we actually like came across each other. I don't know. I don't remember that. Do you remember how we kind of?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure that out as well. I've been thinking about that. Like, what was the initial connection that we made? And I think it might have been something along the lines of, maybe I liked some of your background music to your video or something like that. It may have been something like that. And I may have reached out and I was like, hey man, I like this track, or I don't remember what it was, or it might have just been me wanting to reach out and saying, hey, I love what you're doing. Let's connect. And you were gracious enough to kind of reach out. And I think at that time, what was so interesting is, I think I was definitely a much smaller YouTuber than you were at the time. Like, I was just, I was not nowhere near where I'm at now in terms of size or anything. So I was like surprised that someone like you, who has like a way bigger channel, would be, reaching out or willing to reach out and connect.
You have had a strong like degree of success in the last just like year or two. Like, your channel has absolutely blown up. I think when we first connected, I think you were still under like the 10,000 subscriber mark.
Yeah.
And to be able to see you now, you're over 500,000. Is that correct?
Yeah, thankfully, by God's grace, we just passed over that not too long ago. So that was exciting.
Big
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thanks, man.
I think back to some of our early conversations. You, me, and John, we'd hop on the phone every once in a while to kind of encourage each other, because I think all three of us were kind of in a similar space. Like, is this really worth it? Is it gonna work? Is this always just like a Hail Mary dream, or could this actually become something more meaningful? And if I remember correctly, at the time, most of your attention was towards tutoring kids. Is that correct?
Yeah, actually, and you have it right. I wasn't full-time whenever you and I started. I was still teaching math full-time, and I was tutoring in the evenings, and I think I had just started my math tutoring company, and so I was hustling. I was trying to manage YouTube. I was trying to manage family life. I was trying to manage my business. I think I was still volunteering at my church, and it was just crazy. I was just doing so many different things. So that is basically, thankfully, over time, God blessed me to be able to go full time. And I think you were already kind of full time at that time.
Full time with air quotes. Full time, yes, but as far as like full time energy, but as far as income, certainly not full time at that point. I think that year where we first started talking was I had made something like $20,000 through YouTube. But I had spent $18,000 on getting to that point, as far as like purchasing equipment and education and travel and all those things. And so, I had $2,000 to show for a year's worth of hard work. And so,
man, I'm so far from being able to do this like that full time, or being able to earn that kind of money, or have those kind of numbers. I don't know. I guess I don't really think about it in those terms, I suppose. I don't know, but maybe nobody does until they end up there. I don't know.
Profit.
Full-time, air quotes, definitely.
Yeah. Well, man, what a blessing. That I'm sure God has blessed you beyond that now, which is great. So, testament to your faithfulness there.
It's a testimony to my wife, honestly. She carried the load for a number of years, really, and just really believed in.
That move is always a bit strange to me, the whole, you know, praise to God for your faithfulness to this thing which has delivered fruits. It's like, well, what about all the other YouTubers, as you say, that have put in the hard work, as you have done apparently, to get to where you are?
The vision of what, we felt like God was calling us to. So actually, on that note, I'm curious, how did the idea of moving into, with all respect, you're a little bit older than I am, is that right?
Oh, yeah. I don't mind saying I'm 45.
Okay,
so,
there you go.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, we're going to be fully transparent today, so that's all good.
I grew up with the internet in my back pocket, and so it was one of those things that, felt normal, felt like a logical extension of just life. But, you grew up in an age where you were already a functioning human being when I was still, a kid without the internet, and you got to see this thing rise, and your family got to see it. So I'm wondering, what did you ever experience those doubts or questions from inward or from those in your network? Like, hey, Allen, you're spending a lot of time on this hobby. Like, what's the deal?
Yeah, I just, it's funny. People ask me that sometimes. And at the time when I was starting, I wasn't really super concerned about.
I guess that probably puts me in the middle. I'm 34. So I remember when my dad first brought home the internet. I must have been like 8, something like that. And he, loaded up the web browser, and you got the lines coming down the page, and that was on an old Macintosh computer. But in terms of my engagement with a computer, playing games and whatnot, I have been pretty much lifelong. I have more or less gotten onto a computer every single day since I can remember.
I wasn't really super concerned about growth and making money. That was so far from my mind. I don't know, but I think that's one of the reasons why God has been faithful, because I wasn't going into this for money, because I had a job. I had a business. I was using that to provide for my family. So trying to use YouTube to earn an income wasn't even on my mind. In terms of views and subscribers, I wasn't even thinking about that, because quite frankly, I was just excited to be able to have people say, hey, I really needed that video, man. Like, that was great, man. The way you explained it makes a lot of sense. And for me, that's really what I was focused on at the time. Yeah.
I think that's awesome. And it's definitely one of the things that has made me grow in my respect for you over the years. To hear your story way back when, I know what it's like to work a full-time job, to try and manage a handful of things, and to try and figure YouTube out at the same time. It feels oftentimes like you're working 2 jobs, if not more, because of all the energy that goes into what you're doing.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it was a juggling act there for a while. And that was one of the reasons why I had to find a way to basically go full-time and to be able to dedicate all of my time, energy, and attention to this, because I knew that as long as I was given 60 or 70 hours a week to volunteering in my church, and which, I think is phenomenal to do, by the way, but volunteering in my church and teaching full-time from 7 a.m. to 3:30, and then leaving the teaching job and going to tutor at 4 to 8 in the evenings, barely having time to spend with my family, and it was just way too much, and I was just trying to squeeze YouTube in on the side. Yeah,
I know that for me during that season, it felt like I was, on one hand, I was giving God my best, because it was actually where all my energy was focused, was on this problem of solving YouTube for myself. But on the other hand, it felt like I was giving God my leftovers, in the sense that I'm committing 40 hours plus to this job. But the thing that I really feel like God has called me to, I'm doing kind of like a few hours here and there when I'm tired during the weekends, as opposed to this is really what I'm about.
Yeah. That's how I felt for the first 2 or 3 years. I was just trying to get something out, without much of a plan. And I didn't have a team of people either. I mean, right now, God has blessed us to have a full team, graphic designer, video editor, and, you name it, several other people that are really helping, which is freeing me up to focus on one thing, content creation. So I'm just so thankful that we're at that point now.
That's awesome. That's huge. That'll make a big difference for sure. You used language of, I didn't used to think about views and subscriber and channel growth. And I don't know if that was just language, or if you were actually meaning that there was a time where you did shift and said, no, time to really focus on what is the strategy side of this. Like, being faithful is fantastic and good, and that's always going to be what you return home to. But at some point, you got to say, okay, if I'm going to do this, I got to be strategic about it. Was there a moment for you where that shift took place?
I think it really started whenever I was learning the platform. Like when I started learning the YouTube platform, what works, what doesn't work. And, I have this saying that I feel like God gave me, but in order to grow your audience, you have to know your audience, right? And so like for me, I came on YouTube and it was all about me teaching the things that I wanted to do, which is great. And I still do that. And I still, when God puts something on my heart, I don't care if it gets 10 views or 10,000 views, like I'm going to put it out there. But I started really looking at and focusing more on the audience and the viewer and said, okay, what is it that my audience is really wanting and needing to hear from me? And I started switching my focus on, okay, let me start creating content that A, is always biblical, but B, is really practical and relevant to where people are and what they need. And when I started doing that and started posting like twice a week, I just started seeing the growth. And even now, I have to, if I'm honest, I have to guard against that prideful thing of, hey, I put this video out and only got this many views, and this guy over here put a video out and it's getting like 10 times more views, and this video it's not that good or whatever. Like, that's human nature, and I have to always guard against that.
Yeah, I mean, there's the whole question. I think that is, fair to some extent. It's like, if you're creating content that no one is interested in watching, then what's the point of even creating the content to some extent?
It's just part of our pride that we have to really constantly, that flesh that we have to constantly kind of kill.
Sure. So when that flesh rises up, like, what's kind of your thought process that you go through?
Yeah, so for me, it's just like going back to those emails that I get from one person, or those comments on the YouTube channel that says, wow, I was literally praying about this morning, and then you posted this video. And it's like going back to the whole audience of one concept. Mm-hmm. It's like, hey, you know what? Even if this reached only one person, then it's worth whatever effort and time that I put into it, because somebody needed to hear this today. So if I keep that as like my center, it just continues to motivate me to do what I do.
Awesome. Yeah. I know that for every channel that exists, the audience is different from channel to channel. And you talked about knowing your audience, and what have you figured out about your audience specifically over the last couple of years, and what have they really been looking for as far as content wise?
I'll tell you what they're not looking for is verse by verse Bible teaching.
I wish, man. Those are the most fun videos to make.
I know. Like, I know you guys went through, was it Romans or?
We went through the book of Romans. It was one of my favorite series of videos I've ever done. And, it just doesn't work as well as everything else you would want it to work.
Yeah, work. Exactly. And that's what I say. If I would ever give advice to a YouTuber, is don't deny who you really are, what God's put on your heart. I think the key with YouTube is you have to mix things up, right? So, I'm still going to do my verse by verse. I did a series through Song of Solomon, not too long ago, and I did verse by verse. I'm going to do a verse by verse teaching soon in another direction. So you should do what God has created you to do. But I think if you just stay in that rut where you're like, okay, this is all I'm going to do because this is what I'm focused on, and your audience is basically trying to tell you, like, okay, we need something more, something different. Right. What my strategy is very simple. Is I go after topics that most Christians are really looking for, and then I use those to bring in a new audience. And then once they come to my channel, my hope is that they will also see, oh, he's got a video on the book of Romans overview, or he's got a video on, trying to understand the book of James, or whatever it is. And that way, I can bring them in with the popular stuff, but then once they get in there, kind of grow them up, with the things that, they really need to know. So that's kind of my process.
I'm wondering if you ever had, and
I think, you could read that as being deceptive. You're trying to hook people in, but then you're determining what they really need. I don't know.
I know that you have, but I'm wondering, when was kind of like your first breakthrough video. We can say viral or whatever. I remember for me, it was in April of, I want to say it was 2016. I did the vlog every day in April, the Veda. It's kind of like a challenge amongst YouTubers.
Yes.
And I was running out of content. Like, I didn't know what else to talk about. So I just said, all right, viewers, like, what do you want to talk about? I'll just do answers to your questions. Someone asked, should Christians kiss before marriage? Which is not a subject I really care about. Like, go ahead if you want to. And if you don't want to, like, cool, whatever. Like, it doesn't matter to me.
Exactly.
I made that video, it was just something I did that morning, responded, whatever, threw it up there. Next thing I find out is that video gets hosted on a very big international Christian blog. And now my views are skyrocketing. And I think my monthly views tripled in that month alone.
Nice.
Because of that single video. And it kind of blew my mind. Like, oh shoot, this is what my thinking at the time, this is what my audience really wants or needs. And I'm wondering, did you have a moment like that for yourself where you had oh shoot, here it is?
Yeah. I think if I can remember, the first really big video that I got a lot of traction for was the Book of Revelation explained in 5 minutes. I think it was called How to Understand the Book of Revelation in 5 Minutes or something like that. And now looking back, I'm like, okay, I see how that video took off, because you got this Book of Revelation that's filled with all this symbolism and all this prophecy, and somebody's going to try to explain that book in 5 minutes. Let me click on it and see how this is even possible to summarize the Book of Revelation in 5 minutes. So I started learning very quickly, people want answers to tough questions, but they want them in as quick and as concise as possible, as opposed to hey, I'm going to give you 1 hour of Revelation. Now, will I do a video that's going to give people 1 hour of Revelation? Absolutely, because now I'm at a point where my audience trusts me. They see me as an authority in this area, and they are willing to give me 30, 40 minutes of their time, and they're crying out for more. A lot of times they're like, hey, Allen, can you give us more on this? But at first, I realized, okay, in order to really get my channel noticed, I have to create smaller videos so that my timestamps will stand out from okay, I could either watch Allen's video 5 minutes and get a summary on Revelation, or this guy is 55 minutes. Let me try this one first, and if I don't get what I need, let me go to the longer one. So that one just started really blowing up and skyrocketing.
That's awesome. Did you notice anything about the kinds of people who are attracted to books about Revelation by any chance?
Yes. Yes.
Eyes got all big. You said yes.
Yes.
I have an idea of what kind of people are attracted to it, but what was your experience like?
I'm sure you do. But no, I mean, prophecy and end time events and anything apocalyptic, anything I do, just that niche, that group or that playlist of videos always does well. I don't know what it is. People are fascinated with the end of the world, the mark of the beast, the tribulation period, the Antichrist, the millennium, you name it, the rapture, and whether that's biblical or not. They're going back and forth in the comment section, just arguing amongst themselves. I just threw the video out and let them talk, but yeah. I'm you guys can have at it, okay? I'm not going to argue either way, but yeah.
Do you think the kinds of people that are attracted to Revelation videos, on average, are good representations of Christianity, or are kind of the ones you're guys, can we just keep it down a little bit? How do you...
I mean, he's in a kind of a difficult situation because, by saying that they are lesser, he's insulting his audience. So he's not going to want to do that.
Feel about watching the interactions take place in the comment section? Because I know what Christian internet is like, and it's not always great.
Well, I've been called everything from a false teacher, to a heretic, simply because I believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, and it's okay, wait, because I believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, I'm a false teacher? Okay. Or because I believe in, the doctrine of eternal security of the believer, that if we want to call it once saved, always saved, people will say, they'll argue with me back and forth. I remember I did a video on, does God condone slavery in the Bible? And people came after me because of my position on that. And, so I'm used to it by now, and I expect it, I embrace it, but it doesn't.
Why? What position could you hold that would be controversial?
doesn't feel good to read a comment when somebody's calling you a false teacher. It's like, it doesn't feel good. So
no, it never feels good. Is not the way that I would describe it, but there's a certain entertainment value to it.
There is that.
I think when I take it at my best, it's entertaining, to say the least. I remember one comment said something to the effect of like, "You are a tiny little man you're a tiny wolf in sheep's clothing," or something along those lines.
I remember you posted that.
And I was just laughing just because, like, what, like, okay, like, hey, you are totally, like, you can have your opinion of me and that's fine. Like, it's justified. It's cool. Whatever you want to believe about me, that's up to you. But then to go the extra step and to take time out of your day to write the comment out, like, to me was kind of surprising. Like, wow, you really care that much that you go out of your way to degrade someone on the internet.
Yeah, and then you have those group of people that, create response videos to, your video or my video, either because A, they feel strongly about it, or B, they're trying to, generate and siphon views off of your channel or your brand or your name to their channel, and so and there's lots of videos out there like that, but that's the beauty of YouTube. People can express how they feel, and they can review other people's content and comment on it, and I embrace it. I think it's fun, man. I think it's good to have those conversations and just dialogue, and for people to challenge one another. But the problem is, a lot of Christians just don't know how to do this in a respectful way.
100%.
That's what frustrates me so much. There's a way to disagree and still not disrespect.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I basically agree with that entirely. I take that basically as permission for me to make this reaction video, and I definitely agree that we should be respectful of other people's opinions. What does respectful mean, however? I mean, I think if a position is, from your own perspective, absurd or stupid, I think you should be able to say that, but that you're not turning that into an ad hominem attack, basically. You're not saying that individual is stupid or that individual doesn't know what you're talking about. You're always talking about the ideas. You're not talking about individuals. That's how I feel about it.
And that's
100%.
That's not, yeah.
Has there ever been a time where the comment section, an email, the DM or whatever made it past, the armor? They found the chink in the armor, and now that comment hit home in a way that you're like, oh shoot, like you're kind of focusing on it for a little bit longer than is maybe healthy.
I don't think so, to be honest with you. I mean, I don't know these people that are making the comments, and if it's something that I feel like there is a level of truth to it, I try to embrace it and I try to receive it and say, okay, God, is there something that I could have done differently in terms of, how I communicate? Because
YouTube comments are a kind of interesting thing, because it's like so many. I haven't really had any, in fact, at all. I don't think I've had any problems in the comment section. I've only had nice comments for the most part. But I have heard a lot of YouTubers talk about how problematic the comments are, and, depending on the type of content that I do, perhaps I will invite more unhelpful comments. But at the same time, you want people to comment, because you want people to help your video. And the best ways to help people's video is obviously to subscribe and all that stuff, but to like the video, and to comment on the video, and the amount of time you watch the video. All those things kind of play into the algorithm and help the video. And so you want to do it, but at the same time, people are kind of critical of the type of comments they're getting. But,
I'm a very passionate person. I mean, I'm just passionate. When I communicate, I'm passionate. And sometimes my passion can come across as maybe arrogance or being abrasive, or not being gentle or whatever the word is, to people who may view things a little bit different than I do. But it's really, behind all of that is just, I'm passionate about what I believe.
That's awesome. That's awesome. You talked about Christians not knowing how to agree to disagree on the internet very well. And it brings me back to some of our earlier conversations. You and I had actually looked for opportunities to collaborate on a number of occasions, and it just never happened. And I remember getting a text from you one day in particular saying, hey, I want to do a video on Seventh-day Adventism. And you kind of shared what your original intent was with this series, why you felt it was important. Can you kind of walk me through where was your mind space at that specific moment?
Yeah. So my mind space at that moment was that I felt as though the Seventh-day Adventist denomination was kind of getting a bad rap because people, labeled it as a cult, or wasn't sure if they were Christians or whatnot. And so the biggest thing I wanted to do was to be able to demonstrate to the world how two brothers in Christ can love the Lord with all of our hearts, or at least try to, and even though we disagree on some very important things, that doesn't mean that one is saved and one is not saved. But basically trying to demonstrate to the world how to have healthy dialogue on issues that you may disagree with. And
I mean, I kind of go back to the comment I made at the opening of this video, that from a kind of orthodox Christian perspective, or what we might call a conservative evangelical Christian perspective, there are things that you can believe that would negate your salvation, though, right? So, where does motivation come into this? I think I've known a lot of conservative evangelicals in my life who feel that it is their responsibility to convert those that are not saved in order to, get them a get out of jail free card, basically, to get them out of hell. And because if that's your theology, if you believe that people that don't hold to this particular theological position, like I accept Jesus into my life as my Lord and Savior type of thing, then you're going to want to correct them. So, yeah.
I think we both, agree that there's some things that we may not see eye to eye on from a theological perspective, but how can we model this for the world to see that, okay, you see things one way, I see things another way, but it's okay for us to be able to respect one another and have our minds enlightened and opened up. So that was always my heart as it relates to, connecting with you specifically.
What do you think those dialogues look like and sound like? What were you kind of hoping for?
Yeah, so I was kind of hoping basically to get a better understanding of what you personally as an Adventist, or more specifically, your Adventist faith or, denomination, of what you all are taught. How do you come to your understandings and your beliefs, and why is it that two people can have the same Bible and come up with two very different things in many?
Because I guess, yeah, it kind of goes back to, feeding the algorithm type problem, that the danger is that you're going to naturally lean into gotcha type content. An argument is probably going to be more, probably going to make for more interesting content. And if you want to continue down the let's have respectful dialogue, I don't know, you're potentially shooting yourself in the foot, but you probably should be doing that because that's the right thing to do. So yeah, I can see why a conflict there would arise.
These situations. And so I wanted to have kind of that conversation to kind of learn about what it is that you all believe that's differently and why. There was never any thought of trying to convert, because I'm not really, that's not really my thing, is to try to convince or force or try to convert someone. I do want to speak the truth about things, and if somebody is left to say, yeah, maybe I need to give that some more thought. He's got a point, and vice versa. I want someone to challenge what I believe as well, and let me wrestle with it.
Mm-hmm. So you texted me the evening before saying, "Hey, let's collaborate," and then kind of like right afterwards, like, actually, never mind, I got a different idea. What happened in that moment there?
Yeah, and so I think that I felt as though I had enough information to be able to put out a video that I thought at the time was a proper representation of what Adventists believe. And so therefore I was like, well, I don't necessarily think I need to collaborate with Justin for this particular video, because I feel like I can put out a video that shows the similarities and differences between evangelical Christianity and Adventism. And I was like, okay, I think I have enough to be able to put that out without collaborating.
For sure. Matt Whitman from the 10-Minute Bible Hour is a good friend of mine. And he actually ended up flying out here to hang out with myself, my pastor, a couple of people from our church, whatever the case is, and got to host like an extended dialogue and conversation, asking questions about Adventism. And because of that friendship, I know what happens oftentimes behind the scenes when you maybe operate outside of the box that the internet Christian is comfortable with. All that to say, I know, I don't know this, but I'm guessing that if your experience is like his, that you received a lot of flack for that first video, which is totally interesting because it was shared within my kind of Adventist community, and people were like, you know what? I don't feel like Allen's got everything right, but that was pretty fair. Like that was, that seems like a good dude. I appreciated the way that he talked about our community. But yeah. I'm guessing that that's not what happened behind the scenes.
Oh, I had a lot of different responses to that video, which for those of you who are watching, I have since taken down, which we'll get to that in a little bit later. But
it sounds like he's kind of he wants to be quite gentle with Adventists, which, I don't know, based on nothing, I'm kind of surprised by that. I would have thought that you would want to demonstrate to your audience why they are wrong.
I had a lot of different responses to that. I had a lot of Adventists who commented on my channel, and they were like, thank you. Finally, somebody who, communicates what we believe and communicates, our true, because they understood that, okay, you may have like a detail here and there that might be a little bit different than what we believe, but like he is including us in the body of Christ as genuine blood-bought lovers of Christ going to heaven. So like, thank you, Brother Allen, for standing up for us and sticking up for us Adventists. And that was one response.
Yeah, so I guess I don't know that much about Seventh-day Adventism, as I've already said. But I guess my area of experience with this is my engagement with the LDS Church. And similarly, I've had members of the LDS Church comment on my videos and say how much they appreciate my take. But the whole question of salvation, or are you going to get into heaven? I don't know, that's just not a question I've ever engaged with, because I don't think in those terms. I don't think about my own Christian faith in terms of what will my reward in the next life be for it. I just don't think in those terms. I think this will come up probably as we get deeper into this video, that it can be quite difficult to converse with people within more conservative realms of Christianity, because our presuppositions are just so wildly different. Like, someone will set out a way of framing a particular issue, and just the entire way that they've approached and framed the issue, I just don't agree with the way that they're approaching it. And so to either agree or disagree kind of just muddies the water, where I would begin from somewhere completely different. But
that I had, and a lot of Adventists were like using that video as kind of a proof text to say here, like, see, even one of your own evangelical Christians believes that we're like legit and we're the same and everything is cool. So I had that response. And then I had, a lot of Christians, or evangelical Christians, should I say, that were like, yeah, man, that's good. Then I had former Adventists that were like, man, you need to go way deeper in what you presented here, because like you're presenting like just the tip of the iceberg of what Adventists really believe, and you're not going deeper. And because I grew up in the Adventist faith, I can tell you that, there's a lot of things that you didn't necessarily go far enough. What you presented in your video wasn't incorrect for so much, maybe a detail here and there, but it was just incomplete. You didn't go far enough. And then I just had some people that were like, brother, you're crazy. They're a cult. I don't care what you say in this video. Like, they're not the same. And they even went as far as to compare, Adventism to Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons and things like that. So there was a lot of different opinions that came in there.
What is that like? Because I mean, you're used to being in the spotlight for controversy. You do your videos on Revelation or whatever.
Yeah, I think I've spoken about this in videos before, but I don't like the word cult because it's a derogatory term. And to call a denomination a cult, such as Adventists or Mormons, really you're just making a claim that my theological position is acceptable, is kosher, and that one is not. That is unacceptable. Now, there are obviously kind of high buy-in religions or high pressure religions, and Adventism and Mormonism are both examples of that. And so I think that's a better way of kind of thinking about it in terms of, low pressure to high pressure denominations.
People are always coming back and forth. But clearly this video struck a different nerve, because they're not just having conversations, but now it's past the phase of like, well, that's a different of opinion. Like, this might be borderline dangerous, or like, what's going on? Because you treated the reaction to this video very differently than what you just described earlier, as far as, people respond and it's okay. They have differencing of beliefs. Like, what made this one different?
Well, I think anytime you are trying to represent another group of people's faith or their beliefs, it's kind of a frightening thing, because, I did not grow up as an Adventist, obviously. And so I wanted to do justice to be able to, communicate. Yeah,
I mean, interestingly, he's obviously coming from a much more, I don't know how you would say it. Yeah, high buy-in Christian faith position, unlike myself, that's coming from a much more, I don't know what the label would be, like liberal Christian position, I suppose. But yes, that act of kind of going across the aisle and really trying to inhabit and understand the perspective which is not your own, I think is a very valuable one. And that's what I've attempted to do with the LDS Church. That's kind of what drew me to this video. That I feel like I want to understand the Adventist tradition more, and I didn't realize the extent to which this conservative guy, this Christian guy, would have been doing the same thing, trying to understand where the Adventists are coming from.
Communicate what I felt at the time was, consistent with, the Adventist faith. You're putting yourself out there, and it's just kind of an awkward feeling to get all these different responses. And it's like, wow, okay, how am I getting this many different responses on this video? And then that forced me to start looking deeper and saying, okay, and this is what I was saying earlier about how when people challenge what you believe or what you present, you have to be humble enough to really take a look at it and say, okay, let me not just brush it off, because this is what I've always taught and what I've always learned. let me really take a step back and let me think about, did my video that I just put out, is that really consistent? Is it complete? Is there anything further I could have done? And that's what kind of started me on the journey towards the next 2 videos.
You and I had talked on the phone earlier about a particular couple that stood out kind of amongst all the noise. Can you talk to me about that? What was happening there?
Yeah, so I got a lot of emails from people who were former Adventists.
King is dead.
And who basically came out of that denomination. And because they loved me, they followed me, they cared for me, like they were very concerned that I hadn't told the whole story, hadn't painted the complete picture.
Do you think they attributed malice to that, or just ignorance?
No, I think it was just ignorance. I think they felt as though, okay, he just doesn't know any better. And how could he have? Because there's probably a lot of teachings that are just so embedded and so unique to somebody who only would really be a master at it if you grew up in it. Like, for instance, I'm not a Jew. I didn't grow up in the Judaism faith. And so I can go research it all day. But like somebody who grew up with that is going to know 100 times, 1,000 times more about that faith than me, who just does a Google search. So out of all the responses, for some reason, I don't know why, because half the emails I get, I don't really open up. I have a team of people that
It's a dangerous
them.
thing to read through all of your emails and all of your comments and DMs. It's not the best practice for mental health.
Exactly. No, it's not. And so I had so many emails from people, former Adventists. And this particular couple, for whatever reason, I decided to open up their email and read it. And it turns out, it's just the craziest thing. It turns out that this couple was not only from my hometown in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but they actually were members of the church that I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Bethany Baptist Church.
Wow.
And I got on the phone with them and they were like, yeah, we go to, I was like, wow, I grew up in a church. So it was the coolest thing. And so basically we were on a Zoom call for 2 hours and they broke down things about Adventism that I would have never really considered or never would have known one way or the other. And my mind was just completely blown away. And so that was the point where I said, I've now got to go back and I have to create another video true to what I just learned. And it would be one thing if it was just out there trying to bash Adventists. It's another thing when I had not only this couple, but several other former Adventists writing me the same things. Because after I talked to them, I went back and read some of the other emails and I was like, okay, you don't really know what's really being taught.
I want to know what it was that they were telling you that was new information. But before that, I'm really curious to kind of, what was the emotions like when, you're this 500,000 subscriber YouTube channel, you're doing a great job, people really trust your word, you put out this video, and then all of a sudden you start to think, oh shoot, I might have missed the mark here.
Yes. Yeah.
I might have actually maybe made a mistake even.
Yeah. I mean, it was humbling, but yet it was exciting at the same time.
Oh,
and I know that's weird. Okay. It was exciting because I got a chance to model to the world what you do and how you should respond when you feel you are wrong. And so many people, when I came out with my second video out of 3 that I did, I think I did 4, right? Additional one that I took down. I think I took the first one down and I did 3 more after.
I wonder what he's saying. Is he saying that he got it wrong in terms of he wasn't critical enough, or got it wrong in terms of he was too critical?
Yeah, I did 3 more after that. But basically, I got a chance to model for the world, like, hey, everybody, I was wrong. I didn't do enough research. I didn't do the proper study. I'm going to try to do better next time. And I confess to you, and to show you that I'm really contrite, I'm going to remove my first video, which at that point, if I'm being honest, it was accumulating. I think it was at about 170,000 views, which as a YouTuber,
that's great.
That's some decent revenue. That's some decent YouTube ad revenue coming in there. But for me, it was so much more than just trying to make money from a video that was starting to really go viral. It was like, I don't want any video out there that might not be the proper representation of what I truly believe. So I took that video down.
differences aside, that's definitely one of the things that I most admire about you and how this whole thing has transpired. In fact, actually watching several of my brothers and sisters in the Adventist denomination actually make kind of response content to you. Wouldn't recommend going out there and watching it if, like, I know. Anyways, all to say, one of the consistent themes was they're picking apart, he's misrepresenting this, he's quoting this out of context over here, he's misunderstanding what's being here. But one thing I kept seeing people return to is this idea right here, that he's going to be intellectually honest. That's something that we can respect. And we say, that's awesome. We need more of that in the world. So to me, it was kind of a mixed bag of emotions in which, like, oh man, like I really don't feel the second or the second, third, and fourth video represent our denomination fairly at all, whereas the first one did. But at the same time, I see where he's coming from. I understand his heart and why he feels led to do this. Like, it's actually a good thing.
So that's kind of the direction I would assumed it would have gone. So it would have been more adversarial, the second video, if I'm understanding correctly. Meaning that he would have probably have disregarded his original comments as to Adventist salvific state. Again, I'm kind of guessing, but I would imagine that's what's happened here.
Admirable from where I sit.
Yeah. Well, you had asked a question before about like what is it that I had learned from the other couple that was a little bit different. And, I think some of the things that they communicated with me, they took me to the Adventist.org website. They also took me to several other websites that they communicated to me that Adventists use on a regular basis. And I can't remember them all right now, but like, that basically Adventists feel like these websites really communicate our beliefs very well. And so then they took me to these websites and they showed me, certain things that were on these websites and certain things that were being said or whatnot. And because they were former Adventists, so you have to understand that they weren't in the faith anymore. Yeah. Their goal was to show me the error in these statements or why certain things that were being said or stated or written on these websites was not consistent with Scripture and some of the problems with Adventism. They talked about this idea of the investigative judgment. They talked about, the respect or the authority of Ellen G. White and the place that Ellen G. White and her writings have within the Adventist faith. They talked about, the concept of the Sabbath, just the whole atonement and salvation and how a person is saved.
My understanding is that Ellen G. White, and again, my understanding is very limited, but I believe her writings are considered to be of God, have biblical authority, perhaps on par with, perhaps above that of the Scriptures.
And do you have certainty of your salvation? And all these different things that, they brought to my attention that I did not know, I wasn't aware of.
Mm-hmm. Which of those kind of hit the hardest for you?
For me, it was because I already knew to some degree the position of the Sabbath in terms of I had some understanding. I didn't know a lot of the things that I discovered in my research, but I had never heard of the investigative judgment. I had never, ever heard of that, ever.
Mm-hmm. No,
until a friend of mine, who I won't say his name, but is a friend of mine who is not an Adventist. He's a very well-known pastor. Mm-hmm. And it's right after I put my video out, he sent me a text and he said, hey man, I think you really need to look into this a little bit further because we are now in communication with somebody who we used to partner up with who was on our apologetics team. And we just discovered that, she's an Adventist and some of her beliefs are different than ours, significantly different. And so they had to excommunicate her from being on their apologetics team.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, not from like fellowship or saying she's not a Christian, but just basically saying, hey, you know what, we don't believe the same thing, and so therefore we need people on our team of apologists who are going to communicate the same thing. I think they stood respect for her and all of these different things. So that exchange really, along with the others, like forced me to say, okay. And he's the one who said, you need to look into this investigative judgment. And you know, I'll refrain from what he said. This is heresy. You know, it's not biblical. You know, they got the atonement wrong and all this stuff. And so I was like, okay, I'll look into it. And I started looking into it, started talking to people, and I think that was the very first video that I talked about.
What was it about your understanding of the investigative judgment that felt so, like, you didn't use the word, your friend used the word, but I'll bring it up, like, felt so heretical?
Yeah, as I understand it, first and foremost, it was the origin of how that whole doctrine even came to pass. And from what I understand, you know, it comes from, you know, 1844 and different missed prophecies from, you know, William Miller, and, you know, as a result of Christ not coming back, you know, in bodily form. Then from what I...
So, William Miller, the Millerites, William Miller he fought in the American War of Independence, I believe. No, it might have been. No, it was one of the later wars with England, I think. And during that war, he had some kind of, you know, brush with death, but survived, and attributed that to God's, you know, having a hand on his life. And as a result, he became a preacher, and he was the first to develop a kind of a theology of the second coming, in which we can pinpoint a literal date. And that has become a kind of trope of fundamentalist Christianity ever since. And eventually that date arrived, and of course, there wasn't this great rapturing event. There wasn't the second coming. And that was given the name the Great Disappointment, in which people were literally believing that they were going to sit on their roofs, having given all their money away, and that Jesus was going to appear, but that didn't happen. It was called the Great Disappointment. I believe Ellen G. White would have been like a teenager at that time, or something like that. A young woman, and felt that disappointment deeply. And what happened was, given that didn't happen, they had to reinterpret what the significance of that event was. And so they gave a theological interpretation to suggest that something significant did happen on that date, even though it wasn't the second coming. And I'm a little bit hazy about this, but it has something to do with the temple in heaven. So it's kind of mirroring the idea of there being these different sections within the Old Testament temple, within the Jewish temple. And that at this time, on this day, Jesus moved from something like the outer courtyard to the inner room, or the other way around, the inner room outwards. And this has some kind of great theological significance to Ellen G. White. And that's kind of the foundational theological idea that Seventh-day Adventism is built on. I believe. This is, you know, I haven't looked into this that much. That's kind of just all I can recall at the moment.
Gather, you know, there was more insight or revelation that was given. It's like, okay, we got the date right in October 21st or somewhere around there, 1844, but the event was wrong. It's like, okay, Christ isn't coming back physically in bodily form, but instead he's going to heaven, entering into the second phase, if I can borrow language from your website, you know, the second phase of his atoning ministry. And so that statement right there really rubbed me the wrong way and bothered me, because it was like, okay, if Christ's work on the cross is complete, and even said on the cross, it is finished, tetelestai, there isn't any more work that he needs to do to finish his atonement, to finish his work.
Yeah, so this is kind of orthodox Calvinistic theology, that Jesus died on the cross and expunged all of our sins, and all we have to do is believe in him, and that sacrifice has been done once and done for all, or done for all believers, if you take the limited atonement idea. But Ellen G. White is obviously interpreting contemporary events and framing it through this kind of mystical frame. And yeah, obviously a conservative evangelical is going to butt up against that idea. That's why I'm kind of surprised that he would have done this video initially in which he was more sympathetic, because I can definitely see outright why there would be, great theological difference there.
Work, and I felt like the whole doctrine is an insult to the finished work of Christ, because if Christ either finished his work on the cross or he didn't, and if he finished it, then there isn't any more work that he needs to do to be able to finish our salvation, if you will, or any of those types of things. He said, it is finished. I've paid the price for their sins, past, present, and future. And so when I looked at, this idea, okay, he's in heaven, and he's, from what I understood, and I could be wrong, but it's like, okay, he's still doing an investigation upon the lives of believers. And when that investigation is done, then there'll be a judgment made based on these individual believers' lives. And it puts us in a place where there's no real certainty of your salvation. And it made me feel like, okay, what are the criteria upon what Jesus is judging me for? And if he is, then what was the point of him going to the cross anyway? Because if I have to still do certain things in order to get approved from this judgment, then am I really saved at all?
And I mean, this is a kind of problem that arises within Christianity all the time. It's the way that it's often framed within Calvinist circles is works versus grace. Is it just a case of believing in Jesus and then salvation follows, or do you need to believe in Jesus and then conform yourself to a certain way of being? And the argument there would be that if you are truly saved, then the works will follow, and so that will kind of confirm the fact that you were saved to begin with. But if they don't follow, then perhaps you never were. So is the emphasis on the works, or is the emphasis on the grace? And it's kind of a theological debate as kind of old as time, basically. And the LDS Church tends to put quite a strong emphasis on works, whereas, as I say, kind of Calvinistic or evangelical conservatism tends to put the focus on grace.
Yeah, like those are huge red flags. Like I can understand where you're coming from. Did you then make a connection from that to things like the Sabbath, for example, or?
Yeah. So
you're taking a deep breath. We're friends here. It's all good.
Oh yeah, I know. This is great, man. This is awesome. So the thing that rubs me the wrong way about
because Seventh-day Adventists they like the Jews celebrate the Sabbath on the Saturday, I believe. And the reason Christians celebrate the Sabbath on the Sunday is because Jesus rose on Sunday. And so right from 1st century, 2nd century, Christians began to gather on Sunday because Sunday is the day that Jesus rose. And hence, when the Sabbath was celebrated shifted from Saturday to Sunday. So, is the Sabbath Saturday? Is the Sabbath Sunday? Well, depends who you ask.
Idea of the Sabbath is, I respect 100% people who want to take a specific day of the week and honor that to the Lord. Like, I get that. I understand that. As a matter of fact, I respect it. And I think that it is so admirable. And
on that note, I've also heard in the past conservative Christian pastors say that they do not take their Sabbath on a Sunday because that's their work day, right? That's the hardest day of work for them because that's the day that they're in the pulpit. And so they take another day as their Sabbath day or their rest day.
And I think it's something that, if I'm honest, I would love to get to the point in my life where I do that. Like, I really do. I think it's so cool to be able to say, you know what? I've got 6 days to work, and I'm going to work my butt off those 6 days, but I'm going to take a day to rest. But where we deviate is seeing this Sabbath as a binding law that's still in place today. And more importantly, and this is the part that I'm struggling with, and maybe you can help me, or maybe we'll do something on my channel where you can help me understand. But like, sure. It's an offense when Adventists will start to connect a person's salvation to their obedience to the Sabbath. Yeah. And, when I started reading a lot of Ellen G. White's writings and different things where she would talk about, like, salvation is obeying the Sabbath is like the golden clasp of salvation, and it's what connects or unites a believer to God. Or, if you come into understanding that that you should obey the Sabbath, but then you decide your entire life that you do not want to obey the Sabbath, then, you're basically going to experience fearful judgment or whatever.
Yeah, so they put a great deal of significance on it being the Saturday. It's a kind of mark that you are a good Adventist, that you recognize that Saturday is the Sabbath. But yeah, I would just imagine that the Ellen G. White position and the Seventh-day Adventist position is that your salvation is dependent upon the fact that you are a Seventh-day Adventist. That would be my guess.
Wording that she said there. So it was almost like, if you don't know about the judgment as a believer, then you're going to be judged like less strictly. But if somebody comes to you and says, hey, you need to obey the Sabbath, and they show you in the scripture that you need to, and you decide not to, then you are not saved. And that was a very offensive, very, very offensive, because it's like, okay, I can love the Lord, I can serve him, I can be obedient to him, I can deny my flesh, I can share my faith, I can use my gifts, I can make disciples, I can honor him 6 days of the week, and then because of this one issue, I'm not a Christian.
Right.
And yeah, that really rubbed me the wrong way.
I hear where you're coming from, and like, if that's how it was presented to me, 100% major issues with it. I'm on the same page with you on that. When I hear you talk about all the criticisms that you have of Adventism, my first response really is like, yeah, there's a grain of truth in that. And it might even be larger than a grain. Like, there's a whole bunch of truth in what Allen is saying. And so part of me is like, I'm really grateful for the videos that you create, because you highlighting these problem areas are actually some of the work that me and some of my closest friends, and whether they're pastors or lay people in our church, are all trying to work on, saying, yeah, we see this too. We see the maybe heavy emphasis on works as opposed to the finished work of Jesus. Like, we see that, and we're working towards correcting and steering this giant body of people.
So, yeah, there's also the problem here, and this is, again, something that comes up in the LDS Church. To what extent are we recognizing this as a theological problem or a theological barrier? Or to what extent, as an Adventist, are we just attempting to mitigate the significance of that problem by playing it down. So we're not really addressing it. We're just trying to emphasize it less in order that we're not rubbing other Christians up the wrong way. And I find that problematic because you're not really addressing the root theological issues. All you're doing is trying to finesse presentation in order to appeal to what is kind of considered the contemporary mainstream Christian perspective. And again, you see this with the LDS Church, that you're changing the emphasis in order to not put people off at the first hurdle, which is a problem, I think.
So I'm there with you on that. But at the same point, it also highlights that for every one person that is like this,
conservative Christians tend to kind of hold to their faith as if it's a kind of brick wall. And each brick within that wall is kind of holds deep theological significance. And if you were to remove any one brick or disprove any one brick, the entire wall would come crashing down.
see growth in my denomination, but also troubling in the sense that, well, you're only seeing the glass half full. I don't know. I don't even like that analogy. You're seeing it from one angle, and it's not representative of the Adventism that I know and that I love. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I want to, if I can, I want to ask you a couple questions. So
sure.
How two questions, so I'll make sure I don't forget them.
Okay.
The first question is, how do you harmonize your personal positions theologically or whatever with what has traditionally been taught in Adventism?
So before he gets onto that, I just have a thought about the way people's theological perspective is kind of held, that conservative Christians tend to kind of hold to their faith as if it's a kind of brick wall. And each brick within that wall is kind of holds deep theological significance. And if you were to remove any one brick or disprove any one brick, the entire wall would come crashing down. Which I think is a kind of problematic way of approaching one's Christian faith, because I kind of hold to this idea that we should be holding everything lightly, that we should be always willing to take any particular piece of our faith and be critical of it, engage with it, and be willing to allow the pieces to fall as they may.
I'm hearing you say quite a bit like, yeah, I agree with you, or hey, I see your point, or hey, that makes sense, or but like, if I were to meet another Adventist on the street, they might be like, no, I don't hear any of you, I don't agree with you. Like, how do you harmonize being a devout Adventist with, okay, but Ellen G. White does seem to say this, and we do revere her as an inspired messenger, and she's saying that the Sabbath unites you to God as a golden clasp and all this. But how do you harmonize some of the things that you have been taught or that your denomination believes with maybe where you might see yourself right now as and I don't want to label you, but maybe as a middle moderate, maybe not an extremist or whatnot. But then the second question, so I don't forget, is how do you feel like your denomination views you, someone who seems to take a more
how dare you be a moderate?
Accepting is the word, approach to faith and inclusivism maybe than maybe others that maybe on the online space. So we won't say names, but others that are maybe a little bit more aggressive.
Sure. So how do I, the first question, you're going to have to walk me back through this, is
I know. That's too quick.
Generally speaking, how do I view my relationship to faith and like Ellen White? Was that kind of the question?
Yeah, I probably shouldn't have asked two. I just knew I was going to forget.
Yeah, because I'm lost.
I know. So like, how do you harmonize like certain things that are seemingly like staunch? This is what Adventists are taught to believe. Like, salvation is like, if you don't keep the Sabbath, you're not saved. Like, you don't love the Lord. Like, that's just like Adventism 101, or that's the Salvation 101. With where you are at now, how do you have a different perspective of that? Or do you have a different perspective of that? How can you have a different perspective of that as an Adventist when your denomination says this? And that's the question I've been wondering, because so many Adventists have come back to me and they're saying, Brother Allen, you don't.
This kind of makes sense of his opening comments as well, of his many rooms type idea, that it seems like he represents within Adventism, from what I've gleaned so far, a more moderate position, or even a more universalist position. He seems to be affirming the legitimacy of all other Christian perspectives. And yeah, I think you do run into this problem with, if you are taking a more moderate position with these new religious movements. What do you do with the fact that your founder took a more extreme position? And again, the LDS Church runs into this problem all the time of how do they reconcile what the LDS Church looks like today compared to what Joseph Smith taught and what he was driving at.
Get it. You didn't represent us well. You didn't do this, didn't do that. You got it wrong. And I'm like, I'm reading from your website. I'm reading from your, Ellen G. White, who you revere, and she says it right here. So that's why I was shocked. I'm like, where did I go wrong? What am I missing?
I appreciate you asking me the question. I think you hit it on the head when you said seemingly teaches this. And this is probably where you're, again, this is like, I need to nod the tip of the hat to people who have actually been taught that. I wouldn't be surprised if some people have actually been told in so many words or less that if you don't keep the Sabbath, you're not going to be saved. Like, I'm sure that has happened more than I want it to happen. And so I don't discount that person's experience. To that person, that I would simply say, like, I'm sorry. That person who taught you that wasn't teaching what the Bible teaches. And here's the part that, like, to answer your question, isn't actually teaching what the church teaches either. So I know that it happens experientially, and I'm always heartbroken over that because it just puts you in a terrible place. Like we were talking about, no assurance of salvation, no peace and joy. Like, it literally takes what the Sabbath was meant to in its essence, flips it on its head, bastardizes it, and literally accomplishes the exact opposite of what the Sabbath was meant to accomplish. So there's a million and one ways to answer this, but I don't want, like, I don't know if it's helpful for us to go for like an actual theological discussion, but because that's not really what I care to do. If people want to know about the Sabbath, like, cool, well, I'm happy to talk about it. But all that to say, where it's been taught that way, I would echo, no, that's wrong.
Yeah, so that is interesting as well. He really doesn't actually want to engage on the nitty-gritty of theological issues, I suppose.
Wrong. It's not good. It's not what the Bible teaches, nor is it what actually Adventism teaches. When Adventism actually communicates its beliefs, the Sabbath is always done in the same way that you would do something, like, it would be the way that you treat your wife. Like, date night isn't a requirement. Like, this is the actual language that the majority of Adventists understand the Sabbath. It's your special date with God. It's a 1 week reoccurring intimate time with God. In the same way that you don't have date nights with your wife in order to stay married from this, like, struggling to achieve workspace. Like, no, you have date nights with your wife because you love her and because you want to foster intimacy in your relationship. It's a gift. Date night is a gift for the two of you. That's how Adventists actually view and teach the Sabbath. That Sabbath is a memorial of his creative and redemptive power. And because we are saved by grace through faith, because of what Jesus has accomplished, we enter into the rest that he has already purchased for us.
Right. And obviously, like you said, our goal is not to get into the theological stuff, which we won't. But the question that we'd have to ask if we use that analogy is, so if I marry my wife and we're married for, I don't know, 50 years, and I never one time ever take her out on a date, wouldn't that bring into question whether I love my wife? I mean, like, because if I love her, I would date her. I would take her out on a date. And I think that's where the disconnect is. It's like, okay, sometimes it can be presented as, okay, we love the Lord because we keep this one day. But if you go your entire life and you don't, like, how can you say you love the Lord when you're not dating him once a week? Or, and that's the interesting part. What about all the people that are dating him once a week, but not on that day? And so that's a whole nother conversation we don't have to get into today. But like, I date the Lord on Wednesdays every day. That's my date night with him. Like, why am I looked on as different because I choose Wednesday to date the Lord and you choose, Friday to Saturday? So it's just an interesting type of thing.
You're not looked at differently, not by the church as a whole. Will there be people in Adventism that look at you differently and look at you as less than? Absolutely. But that's probably true of every church, because you don't speak in tongues, you're not quite manifesting the gifts of the Spirit, or because, you don't tithe as much as I do, then simply because you can have the experience doesn't mean that that's what the organization is actually putting forward in the least bit. Adventism actually has a very open view of salvation, perhaps maybe even more open than some Christians are comfortable with. Like, people feel like we're erring on this side. I think that the reality is that you would feel that we're erring on the other side. Every Adventist who knows what Adventism teaches would be very comfortable to say, someone like Allen, who, if I understand, you're a Baptist, right?
No, I'm non-denominational. I grew up Baptist, though.
Okay.
But
so
I would consider,
every Adventist who understands what Adventism teaches would be like, hey, as far as I can tell, as long as Alan's living up to the light that he has, he loves the Lord, like, boom, like, he's in. If he's put his faith in Christ, like, you're saved. That's true of Catholics, that's true of Methodists, that's true of Baptists or Pentecostals. Adventists would even go a little bit further to say, hey, if someone's living up to the light that they have, even if they've never heard the name of Jesus, God can choose to include them in Jesus's saving work as well. And so we understand the passage like there's no other way to salvation but through Jesus. In the same way, like
I wonder, because this is the same kind of with the LDS Church, isn't it? That for the most part, everyone is saved, but are they really saved? Because there's these degrees within heaven, and that bottom degree doesn't sound all that fun. So really you want to be in this higher tier. And I imagine that that's probably the same within the Adventist tradition then. If we're going to go for a more universalist idea, then those that are Adventist must be exalted beyond everyone else.
If you're driving up you're going up the Pacific Coast Highway and you say, hey, there's only one freeway to get from this part of the island to this next part, and it's the 5 North. Even if you don't know that it's called the 5 North, there's only one way to get there. So if you somehow make it here, you only made it here because of that one way, that one freeway. And so we would say, we would interpret that the way that someone is saved can only be through the work of Jesus. But the crazy part is that we would even go further and say, even if you didn't hear his audible name, Jesus or Yeshua, like say, for example, someone like Abraham or David or anyone in the Old Testament who have never heard the name Jesus, if they make it to heaven, it's not because they kept the old covenant really well, because record would show they didn't.
Right. If
they make it to the kingdom, it's because of what Jesus had done on their behalf. And so we actually have a much more open view of salvation than is oftentimes represented in social media or blogs or in unfortunate interactions.
Well, I didn't mean to take the conversation and steer it in a direction of theology, but like I said, maybe we'll have a little bit of a different conversation whenever we do something on my channel. Not an argument or anything, but just maybe I'll be asking questions where I'm trying to get more of an understanding of.
Yeah, I did note that there was another video that these guys have done together. So yeah, if that's on his channel, that is of a more theological nature. That might be an interesting video to follow up this conversation with, depending on engagement, depending on if you guys find this interesting.
About things, and I think that will be very helpful for me and maybe my viewers as well.
Let me ask you, knowing that that's the relationship that we actually view the Sabbath with, does that change at all, or how does that change your understanding or your perspective of Adventists? If it's we keep the Sabbath and we must keep the Sabbath to be saved, and anyone who doesn't is lost, versus no, this is just a gift that God gives us and we want to take the best advantage of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's two totally different perspectives, because one is more inward looking, okay, I'm going to take this as a time to really build myself up and edify my relationship with the Lord, and I'm focused on that. But the other is more of a self-righteous, judgmental type of position where it's hey, those who don't do things the way I do it, or don't see things the way I do, or don't date God once a week, don't love the Lord as much as I do, or to go as far as say you're not even saved. I think those are two very, very different approaches. And so because I understood the latter approach to be the dominant approach, which is, hey, you don't love the Lord, and more importantly, you're living in disobedience. And that's the thing that I just still struggle to reconcile is, as an Adventist, how can you believe so strongly about the Sabbath, but then also not believe that people who don't follow the Sabbath are not living in disobedience? That's the part that I'm harmed. It's I would think that an Adventist would say, because I've shared with you scriptures about the Sabbath and my position, and you still decide not to, you are living in blatant and total disobedience, similar to if I was living in the LGBTQ, or I was shacking up with somebody before marriage. I know I'm not supposed to shack up, but I am. I know I'm not supposed to be homosexual, but I'm choosing to be. I feel like I'm being placed in that category.
I won't be drawn into that at the moment. That's a whole can of worms.
Because of that issue. And if I am, then that's a very uncomfortable category to be placed. If I'm not, then I respect, and I think it's admirable to take a day of the week and spend time and date the Lord. I think it's awesome. Definitely. See nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, I mean, that's how the church teaches it. I mean, it's not how every person in the church teaches it. There are people, like I said, and I always, if I'm doing this ad nauseum, I apologize, but I always want to respect a person's experience. I know that I have been on the other side of the coin, where I have been the legalistic, self-righteous, proud individual who believes that I'm actually doing something to accomplish security with God. I know what that's like. And because I know what it's like, I don't want to ever discount someone's experience having run into someone like that. But the reality is that's not the church's stance. The church is very clear that salvation is only through faith in Christ, through his works, not our own. And anything that we do is kind of something that we tack on afterwards as a thank you, as just our pursuit of intimacy with God. It's the same way that we would look at Bible study. Bible study doesn't save you. If you study 1 hour versus 2 hours a day, you're not half as saved. No one would ever say that. But why do we study the Bible? We study the Bible because of the revelation of Jesus Christ. Hey, because he's done this, let's learn more about what is our inheritance, what is our gifting presently, what is our mission and our calling, and how can we best live out the gospel towards other people. That's why we study the Bible. That's why we would theoretically give monies or serve in missions, or why we would do any of the other things that Christians do. It's because of gratitude. It's because of what Jesus has done. Therefore, hey, we want to live out our life in a transformed way.
Yeah, and if that is the prevailing belief and practice and mindset, then that's what I initially presented in my first video, which was, hey, the Paul says, let each, some people see one day as being more sacred than another. Others see, every day as alike. Let each man be fully convinced in his own mind, and in my mind, I was like, hey, you know what? Yeah, this group, they believe that, they want to take that one day of the week, and that one day has to be sundown Friday, sundown Saturday. Okay, I respect that. All power to you, but then there's another group that doesn't. And my goal was to like, hey, let's not pass judgment on one another. Let's respect one another, because I feel like our love for the Lord can be expressed and should be expressed in a plethora of ways, and not just so singular focused. The observance of the Sabbath. It's like, okay, I'm treating people well. I'm giving. I'm serving. I'm loving my wife. I'm confessing my sin. Like, there's so many ways that we can express our love for the Lord.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would agree with you on that. You had a second question.
Yeah, so the second question I had was, because you are or seem to come across as more of a moderate and not necessarily an extremist in the Adventist faith, does your denomination in any way, maybe see you any differently, because you're not like telling people, that they have to obey the Sabbath, or, kind of what does that relationship look like?
So I think your question actually lands on one of the complexities, to me, beautiful complexities about Adventism, and that's the incredibly diverse nature of our denomination. That's true both politically. There are people who fall far left, or maybe not far left, who are on the left, who are on the right, people who believe different things when it comes to theology, who would be more theologically conservative or theologically progressive or liberal or moderate or whatever the language is. And this is kind of one of the best things about Adventism. A friend of mine, a pastor within Adventism, describes Adventism as a large tent with a lot of different people underneath it. And I think that that's a good thing, that diversity lends to creativity. It lends to an outside the box type of a thinking. And so, there are absolutely people within Adventism who might watch this exact video and say, no, Justin, you don't represent us. Like, that's not Adventism as I've heard it or I've taught it. It's like, okay, that's probably true. And then there will be many other people who would say, no, what Justin is communicating, at least in spirit, is exactly on for what Adventism means to me. And, for what it's worth, I am viewed within Adventism as very well accepted. I do speak on behalf of our denomination at important key meetings within the denomination for leadership and things like that. I do hold positions where I represent.
Yeah. This goes back to the whole, desire to represent the denomination in a way that is favorable. And you could see someone like this, a communicator on YouTube, that is articulating a more moderate position as being someone that the denomination wants to hold up, because it's someone that is able to speak to the Christian sphere on YouTube and make some ground. But there is a question from the kind of authority structure within Adventism of how genuine that endorsement is. Like, is it an endorsement out of, we want the church to move in this more moderate position, or is it purely presentation and there's not actually a desire to reform any kind of deeper theological ideas?
Various subsections of the constituency. And so I have very strong relationships with administration and leadership in our church. I also do a lot of kind of like contract work and advising consultation for people in the denomination, especially when it comes to like social media and things like that. And so I'd like to say that for what it's worth, I do represent a good, healthy chunk of the Adventist denomination. And I guess this kind of brings up the question, and something that I'd love to kind of toss back to you. And it's really, it's like, how do you decide who represents Adventism well? Because from what our conversations have been over the last several years, I get the sense that you and I are very much on the same page as far as what matters and what, is maybe important but isn't central. But then also, you had this experience with ex-Adventists and people who are very critical of the church. And I'm just wondering how for you put weight into one person's perspective or story or experience versus the other person's.
Yeah, so I like to get a variety of people's experiences, because I do understand that just like in evangelical Christianity, if you could talk to people, and you got some people that say you have to speak in tongues in order to love the Lord. You have to speak in tongues in order to be saved. You have to speak in tongues to demonstrate that you have the gift of the Holy Spirit. You have to be saved only by calling on the name of Jesus versus the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And you have to be baptized by, immersion and not sprinkling. And there's a million different, you could talk to people, and it's not just, one dimensional. So, I try to, look at people's hearts and say, okay, this one particular member of Adventism or of the Adventist faith doesn't necessarily always represent the entire denomination any more than I would want any one Christian to be the spokesperson for, or one Baptist or one non-denominational, or I'm not a charismatic or a Pentecostal, but I would assume that they wouldn't want, one member of their denomination to represent, all of them. And just, we're flawed individuals. And sometimes we don't always speak, with perfect accuracy, or we may let our flesh get the best of us. So, I just take things on a case-by-case basis, and which is the reason why with my videos, I tried my best to not necessarily focus on any individual conversation I've had with one or two Adventists, because I knew beforehand that would get me into trouble. But it was more so, okay, how can I now go to the source and as best I can look at the website, and then look at, some of the writings of, Ellen G. White, which I know, who I know is very well respected.
Yeah, so it's almost as if they're trying to... I guess it's very similar to the LDS in that respect. They are forced into this position of having to, on one hand, see Ellen G. White as this elevated figure, but on the other hand, distance themselves from some of the theological assertions that she made.
In your faith, and look at those and say, okay, how can I harmonize these things with what I believe the scriptures are saying?
Yeah. And I admire that desire to be as neutral and objective as you possibly can. And I know that the videos that you've created are your best attempt at doing that. And with that being true, if I can maybe wear my heart on the sleeve a little bit, that's not how it felt watching the videos. You certainly highlighted unexperience within Adventism, unfortunately much more numerous than I would ever hope. You have found the very vocal minority of people who have been really hurt by the denomination. I don't want to ever downplay that, but it is a very small subsection. And so to kind of like even just the title of your video, I was wrong about Seventh-day Adventism. Like, okay, cool, you could be wrong, but like between you and me, I know kind of what's happening also behind the scenes with the planning of the SEO of the video and thinking of titles that are clickable and all that. Like,
yeah,
it felt not from like the theology side. Like I'm happy to agree to disagree with you, but as a friend, I felt honestly somewhat betrayed that that you would sensationalize the conversation to that level. If I can be completely transparent,
we're bringing emotion.
I felt kind of betrayed as someone who holds you in high esteem as a friend, that you wouldn't even just picked up the phone and say, hey, this is what I'm hearing. Am I reading this right? Am I spinning, like the way that I'm interpreting some of these words, is this correct? Because I think if you were to talk to any other type of Adventist, they would say, oh, no, you're misreading the intention of these statements. Like you're actually interpreting them in the worst light possible. And as I'm watching through the video, it felt like you were attributing malice to the denomination as a whole, with saying things like, oh, they're specifically trained to hide parts of their theology, for example. Like if that were true, then we wouldn't have our entire belief system on the internet in public view for everyone to see. Like, and so it felt it felt like you had made the transition from, hey, this is my friend who we agree to disagree, to, oh, this is now Allen Parr, this is the host of The Beat doing a sensationalist approach to a controversial topic because it'll get clicks and views, and maybe because he's maybe
It's all about that sensationalism, baby.
retreating a bit because of the public backlash of the first video. I know that's a whole lot, that it's my interpretation of this. I know that that's not your heart, but I just wanted to say that's how it came across and that's how it felt, being on the other side of this equation.
Yeah. And I can definitely understand how it came across, that way. And let me also just say publicly, to you and to anyone else who may watch this video, that you are right. I should have reached out to you specifically and personally, because we are friends and I do value our friendship, to say, hey, Justin, look, man, look, I put out a video. This is what I thought, but now I'm reading different things in that nature. What are your thoughts, on this? Help me understand what you all's position is. And for that, I do apologize, and ask for forgiveness in that regard, because I should have done that. I just felt as though, the people that I spoke with, they weren't hurt by the denomination at all. They just basically came to a different understanding of Scripture and different understanding of how they interpreted the Scriptures based on what they were reared to believe. But there was no malice or any sort of negative, hurt or church hurt or any of those things. And so, I trusted that they would give me a proper understanding, considering that they were in it for so long. I was like, okay, they're not necessarily they don't have an agenda to get back at the denomination as much as it is to help me understand, hey, this isn't necessarily what.
No, they'll have an agenda, though. They'll obviously have bought into a Calvinistic theological framework and want to save anyone that is falling for the, mistakes of Ellen G. White.
What your understanding is not the same. And then also, there was a part of me, and once again, this is me admitting that I probably could have gone a different route, but there was a part of me that it just seemed like so many of the statements that I read, particularly from Ellen G. White, it just seemed like there was no ambiguity. And that's the part that's just so hard for me to understand is, whenever somebody says, observance of the Sabbath is the golden clasp of salvation, or observance of the Sabbath is what unites a believer to God, it's hard for me to read that and think that there's another understanding of that or interpretation of that.
Because in a way, he's not trained to do that, right? He's the Calvinistic evangelical model is to interpret the Bible literally. And so if Adventists are holding up Ellen G. White's writings as being authoritative in this way, then it is natural for a conservative evangelical to take that and to therefore attribute literalism to Ellen G. White's words, whether that is legitimate or not.
It says it right there, or she says that, right? So I would think an Adventist would have to either say, A, she didn't mean that, which how would we know, because we haven't talked to her, or B, yes, she means that, but I, as an Adventist, don't necessarily agree with Ellen G. White. But then I don't know where that would put an Adventist in light of, I don't know where that would, I don't know how that would fly if you say, I don't quite agree with a lot of her teachings and her prophecies and things like that. So to me, it just felt like these are statements, for instance, and I read her statement about, whenever you do evangelize someone, don't lead with, hey, I'm a Seventh-Day Adventist and I observe the Sabbath, but find common ground to talk to the person, about, and then look for an opportunity later to share the truth about, and so that this person can be brought into the light. I'm reading these things and I'm like, it just seems like it's clear. So where am I going wrong? Yeah.
I can totally hear where you're coming from, and I don't think it's necessarily unreasonable to look at it that way, but it is only one way to view what you're reading, and it is the most cynical view of what you're reading, and it's okay if you take the cynical route. I'm not like knocking it, but like the same criticisms that you give of these writings, and like my job isn't to give you a point by point defense of everything that she says, but the same type of objection that you're giving about her writings, you could easily say about many parts of the scripture, where it talks about the importance of, for example, giving to the poor. Like there's things about like, oh, if your kid disrespects your parent, stone him to death. It's like you could find easily, if you go to any ex-Christian, you go to any atheist website that claims to be an unbiased source, saying, hey, I'm just showing you what the text says. They'll point to you 100 things in the scriptures itself that, when taken within just this snapshot with no context, that make the Bible look really bad, that make God look really bad. And as a Bible scholar, you know that it's just unfair to take one or two sentences out of context and then to superimpose that over everything else in the scriptures. And I guess that's why, for me, I felt like it was borderline reckless or irresponsible for you to do the same thing to another kind of like religious writing. To say, because of this one sentence and the way that you choose to interpret it, it now colors an entire, like, multiple millions of people all across the world. It seems really foolhardy. It seems really rushed, when all you could have done is just be like, hey, I see this here. Am I reading this wrong? Is there another way to look at this? And any Adventist who knows what they're talking about could have been like, oh, no, that's not what it means at all. It actually means this other thing. That's why it felt like, oh man, I wish we would have just called. Like, it's okay that we agree to disagree. It's okay that at the end of the day, we choose to worship on different days, or even worship together on, variety days. Like at the end of your video, you're like, come worship with me. Like, yeah, absolutely. I go to a Sunday church here, or I used to because of COVID, but we'd go on like every Sunday to the church in Portland, John Mark Comer's church, who actually is a Sabbath keeper. And we'd have people coming to our church, and so there's no walls here that are erected. That's all I'm trying to say, is that it felt rushed. It felt half-baked, and it makes me feel good to know that you recognize that, and that's, you even apologize for that. So it keeps me secured in knowing that, hey, the Allen that I know, he's a good dude. He assumes the best in people. That's truly who he is. To hear that, to hear your heart behind the entire thing reaffirms that that's who you are.
Yeah, and like I said, I have a nephew, and I who's really deep into the denomination, and like you two are the main two people that I thought of with each video that I put out, and I was like, okay, how are they? I mean, God forbid, my nephew, I've known him for 25 years. I saw him whenever he was born, right? Like, so like, I don't want to lose his respect or his love, or however our relationship changed in any way. But it was just.
So yeah, I do wonder. I guess it's difficult to know, but to what extent is this a kind of feeling that, I don't know, that one is being theologically misled and therefore wants to take a more conservative position and more anti-Adventist position, or a more cynical view would be that this is feeding the algorithm better because his audience, as a conservative evangelical, will respond better to a video which is more adversarial and critical of those denominations which one can perceive as cultish. So, for example, if he was to do a similar video, and maybe he has done a similar video, which is a kind of attack on the theological principles of the LDS Church, then that would probably resonate with his audience.
Things that I was just like, I just can't seem to reconcile these things.
Sure.
And then I have had some conversations, not necessarily with you, but with other current Adventists, and some of their conversations,
I get you. Like I said, we all got the weird uncle, we got the weird aunt out there. Like, I'm sure you're gonna find those people, and to anyone watching, you will meet those people if you like go down the rabbit hole. But this is, like, I guess again, is kind of back to the foundational questions, like, how do we weigh who represents who? And this is, I guess, kind of where the heart of what it is all about, to cast, like, because of one particular experience, you cast shade on an entire group of people. That's where it just feels off. And like, I feel like maybe, Alan, you could have done a better job.
It is a good line of attack. You know, you can kind of, you could always go down that route. If ever there's some kind of disagreement, you can always say, yes, but that position is not representative. And so you need to be able to, I don't know, point to what the authorities of the Adventist Church are saying, if they are spelling it out explicitly, and say where you disagree with that. But again, I wonder, going back to this kind of finessing presentation type issue, if Adventists at the top level are even fully transparent about what the church stands for. That's me being kind of super cynical, but I feel like that with the Adventist church, that would be a major issue.
With your video, just simply saying, you know what, hey, if this is what this is teaching, no, but maybe this isn't what Adventist is teaching, and maybe there's other people here, and maybe bringing people into the conversation rather than just being like the spokesperson or leader.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Well,
I'm not trying to be like, I'm not trying to presume that I teach you what you're supposed to do, but
no, I understand that, and I'm still learning, in terms of, what is the best way to communicate when I may disagree, with certain things. What is the best way to communicate that in a way that's respectful? It's funny, as much as I try to do that on camera and be respectful and it's like I still get passionate about certain things. And, particularly, like I said earlier, we talked about the investigative judgment. Like, part of me is like, hey, this is a insult to the work of Christ. Like, this is saying that he did not finish his work on the cross, and he has more work to do in heaven. And to me, that just, if that is what that doctrine is teaching, I still stand behind. Like, that really just, I guess impassioned, or infuriates
Absolutely.
me, because it's like, that's my savior,
Absolutely.
like,
So much that the investigative judgment, or fill in the blank, any other teaching or any other doctrine that's out there, is used in such a way to instill fear instead of compassion and love, to sow insecurity rather than knowing that you are actually secure with God. Like you right after the tail end of that part of your video, you quoted Romans 8, which is a beautiful part of Paul's writings, that there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. To the extent that anyone teaches anything that undermines the fact that there is no condemnation now, presently, that we don't got to work our way to heaven, like, I'm with you on that. I get frustrated, I get upset, I get infuriated about that, because you're right, it undermines what Jesus has done. And so I'm on the same page with you as that. It just happens to be that I think that if you were to understand this, and the investigative judgment, the language around that is really terrible language. The branding of that needs to really be changed, in my opinion. But I think if you were to understand what it does teach, it actually communicates the opposite. It actually does communicate security. It actually does communicate a finished work of Jesus. And so, not that, again, this is a theology debate, but like, I'm there with you on that. I hear you on that for sure.
Well, I would love to offline have some more conversation with you, so you can help me understand better about some of these doctrines that I'm clearly maybe not fully embracing or understanding what is the spirit behind it, because I do typically take things, on a face value, and I'm like, hey, if this is what it says, if it can be ambiguous, then I try to be very careful. Mm-hmm. But then other things, I'm like, well, how could this possibly be explained in a different way? Mm-hmm. Like when it says this or says that, or, when it says that, if someone has been given the light of the importance of the Sabbath, and they've been exposed to the truth of it, and then they choose to reject it, then, I don't remember the exact verbiage, but it's like, that person is either received the mark of the beast or they're not going to be saved, something along those lines. So in my mind, I'm reading the context, I'm reading it, and I'm like, wow, that's a pretty strong statement, and just like, I'll say this too, just like you have every right to have taken offense to some of the things that I have presented in my videos, which like I said, I apologize because it wasn't meant for that. But there's also a side of me where I'm getting offended as well by reading certain things that seem to insinuate that I'm not saved. And my mom is not saved, and my grandparents aren't saved, and everybody in my family and friends are not saved because, we don't observe the Sabbath. And it felt like when I was reading those things and from talking to some people,
Sure,
that they view me as not being saved, and that was the hard part to accept as well.
I'm there with you, and I think my church, my denomination, has a lot of growing to do in how we communicate what we believe. I think that what you just articulated,
a lot of growing in how we brand ourselves. Oh, sorry, that's me being very critical again. But it's difficult to not view the Adventists as attempting to play not the theological investigation game, but the messaging game.
is representative of a good number of people who interact with Adventist teachings and leave like, whoa, like feeling very, I don't even know if violated is the right word. Just like,
Yeah.
I know that that's the case for a lot of people. And like being a part of this church, growing, like my great grandfather was a Seventh-day Adventist pastor in the Philippines. Now that might not mean a lot, but for a church that was, started in the mid 1800s to be, third, fourth, fifth generation Adventist is kind of a big thing. It means that you're tracing your lineage pretty far back within the church's history. Yeah. My great grandfather was a pastor in the church. I grew up and was kind of reared in Adventist schools. My mom's a teacher at an Adventist academy. Like, this is my people. This is my family. This is my community. And in the same way that every family has its own dysfunctions, it has its own quirks, but you love them even still. Like, that's how I feel about this church. There are things that need growth, and I'll be the first one to say it. There are things that we need to improve on. And for what it's worth, I'm doing what I can from the inside to be a part of that change. And I know that there's many people who are part of this church who feel similarly as well. So I guess that's why I appreciated your videos. Like I said, it was a mixed review, or a mixed emotion for me.
Sure.
But
rightfully so.
Also very grateful for it because it highlights where we need to grow and where we need to improve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and likewise, I appreciate your feedback on the videos because it's a reminder for me every time I put out another video to just do a check and to really, make sure that I have my facts in place and that I'm doing it in a way that's respectful but yet truthful to what I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that end, man, I support you and I'm cheering you on all the way. I mean, I've been a subscriber for years now. Very encouraged by what you do. Definitely consider you someone worth emulating in many respects. Someone that I value as a friend and as a colleague for sure.
And likewise, I've been a subscriber, since the That Christian Vlogger days, which I know has now passed on, to use a better word. But
I'm killing the branding of it. I use that language, so it's all right.
I know. I'm not gonna lie. I do miss That Christian Vlogger. I like what you're doing now. I do, and I love both of them. But I do miss That Christian Vlogger. I think you have so much to offer the body of Christ with the clarity by which you were, presenting advice, dating advice, relationship advice, questions that people have about Christianity. I think you were doing a great job with that, but I understand that God's taking you in a different direction as well. So just know that I'm cheering you on, man, and I love what you're doing, and I love most importantly that we can see things differently, but I can say publicly to you and to everybody watching this video, there's two things that I never did in my videos, and people can go back and look at them. Number one, I never once called Adventism a cult. Never once. Never once did I say, this is a cult, you need to stay away from it. I presented what I believe were some fallacies or things that I didn't feel like were scripturally based, but I never did go there. And number two, I never said that members or any particular member in the denomination was not a Christian, wasn't going to go to heaven, didn't love the Lord. I'm very, very careful not to do those things, because at the end of the day, it's really all about your relationship with Christ. And, it's not my place to necessarily, judge someone's Christianity any more than if it was somebody who was an evangelical Christian. It's just not my place. So hopefully you felt that from a personal perspective, that I'm not here to judge your salvation, and nor do I think, I'll put it this way, I would make the same video about people who are in the Word of Faith or prosperity theology camp, which is a sect of the evangelical Christianity, but I wouldn't say they were a cult, and I definitely wouldn't say they aren't going to go to heaven, they don't love the Lord. I just think that if they believe that you have to be healthy and wealthy in order to be a Christian, I think that's off. So I wanted to make sure you knew that.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Alan.
All right. Well, this is a kind of an interesting first tentative step into the Adventist rabbit hole. It might be interesting to continue down this road and explore more videos, perhaps follow up with the other video they mentioned. As always, please do like and subscribe, and I do appreciate your comments in the comment section below. Any thoughts you might have, any questions you might have, always interesting and always happy to field those. What else should I say? Check out other videos up there. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.